There are a few of you newbies in the crowd watching a hashtag everything is sexist video for the first time, so I'll give you a rundown of what you're in for. This is a video series dedicated to men's issues, ironically based on that video clip of Anita Sarkeesian, you know the one.
Everything is sexist.
Now, what I do here is I take videos, news articles, anecdotes, anything y'all send me, or that I find and are overtly sexist towards men, and present a legitimate, systemic problem. So, Title IX, family courts, etc. I break them down as simply as possible into idiot terms so even the most deluded feminazis could understand them. I provide statistics, links, etc. to help make my case and to raise awareness.
Gay man speaks out about sexual assault by pure evil woman. Filmmaker Frank McGowan says he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder after the brutal and painful attack. A man who was subjected to a brutal and painful assault by a pure evil woman after she discovered he was gay has spoken out about the attack. Filmmaker Frank McGowan said he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) after May 2015 attack, which nearly drove him to suicide. Waiving his right to anonymity to speak to the Daily Record, he said he was at a house party with Cheryl Cottrell, where the chief propositioned him and made inappropriate comments after finding out he was gay. Mr. McGowan said he tried to fend off her advances but was sexually violated when he bent over. She discovered I was gay and made several sexually inappropriate comments, he said. I was absolutely sickened by what she was saying. I've never heard so many vile things. I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water and she followed me. She was asking invasive questions about my partner and asked if I would sleep with her.
So, for all those of you who would say that aggressive predatory behavior is specific to men and a problem faced by only women, get fucked.
I just wanted to get away and asked her to back off. She was getting angry. Something fell from the unit and I bent down to pick it up. That's when she pounced by violently pushing her fingers inside of me. It took all his strength to push her away, he added. I couldn't believe what was happening. It was a brutal and painful assault, he said. Afterward, he was left bleeding and felt like he had been raped, he added. Ms. Cottrell denied attacking Mr. McGowan, but was found guilty of sexual assault in August after a trial at Glasgow Sheriff Court.
This is the point where my blood really starts to boil, because you'll see.
She was placed on the sex offender register and ordered to do 120 hours of community service. Mr. McGowan said he had suffered severe anxiety and flashbacks since the assault.
So bitch made a brother bleed from what she did, and she only gets 120 hours of community service. Yeah.
Things got so bad I tried to take my own life, he said. Thankfully, a close friend stopped me at the last minute, but I'll never get over what happened to me. He added that he hoped his story would encourage others to speak up about sexual assault and PTSD. I wanted to throw away everything good in my life over one absolutely abhorrent woman, he said. She's pure evil.
So the uninitiated are probably asking me why I've decided to address this specific case. Some of you are probably asking why this bitch only received 120 hours of community service for such a heinous action. A slap on the wrist for a sexual assault, if you will, that resulted in physical damage as well as psychological ramifications that come with, such heinous actions. Would you like to know why this woman only got 120 hours of community service? It goes beyond the legal definitions of rape in the UK, being that only forcible penile penetration constitutes as rape. That one's obvious. But would you like to know why this is the case? Why that is the precedent that has been set? Why things haven't changed, especially in Western cultures, despite the fact that the West is considered a patriarchy? I can tell you exactly how this has happened, if you'll only lend me your ears for the allotted amount of time that this video is going to be. I have no idea yet, but we'll see. In order to do this, I will have to dive deep into the archives of everything to present my evidence. At Third Wave Femme, rape is anything a woman finds uncomfortable. Men can't be raped because they have all the power in society. Hashtag destroy patriarchy. If this were true, and the patriarchy were real, that bitch would have gotten a lot more than a slap on the wrist. The last time I made a post about this, I wasn't really sure what I was talking about. I was unsure and dubious and looking for opinions, but I have formed my own, influenced by others of fucking course, and want to make it clear, and because I don't care if you call me asshole or Satan again, that I believe this: men can't be raped. You're probably asking how these individuals can justify such logic, though. So let me show you a follow-up double down from Make Feminism Radical. It's just a matter of semantics. Men can totally be sexually abused. The way I see it, rape is the way men enforce our reproductive roles as breeders. It goes beyond unwanted sex. It's not about sex, it's about roles. There you go. Try to unwrap that Titanic monolith gymnastic nonsense. And then there's this, yes, men get raped too, but not by women. The only way a woman could sexually abuse a man is if that man was a child who didn't know what was going on. But a woman can't rape a grown-up man. Face it, idiots, that's just some shit men invented because they always want to play the victim. And the men suffer too, you know, card. It's physically impossible. How did she rape you? Did she spread her legs and ride you? If you didn't want sex, you should have shoved her off. Men are physically larger and stronger and can shove a girl off their laps if they didn't want to have sex with them. And also, girls aren't uncontrollable when it comes to sex and don't go raping people, so stop trying to play the victim, saying a woman raped you because the next morning you saw her without makeup and you freaked out. Well, I'm pretty sure I just provided you with quite a viable example of such a thing, you know, sexual assault being that thing. But even then, there are a few less straightforward examples that I could go into that definitely constitute as rape and sexual assault. For instance, what if a guy was drunk and she takes advantage of his inebriated state? I have in fact covered such a case in this series. Man receives oral sex while blacked out, gets accused of sexual assault 2 years later. Wow, okay, step back, breathe it in. Has the hypocrisy settled yet? Is the obvious problem obvious yet? Do you not see what is wrong here? What if she's got him tied up and force feeds him Viagra to keep him in a state that makes him hard? Pretty sure the Young Turks did a video on that one before as well, which I also covered for obvious reasons. Give us more than a one-liner with a negative connotation. I don't know, like some sort of video evidence of someone being a disgusting human being? Now, where could I find a good example of this? I might actually have something.
A robber comes into a hair salon and, you know, has a gun and he, you know, tells them, give me your money, I want everything that you guys have, and he tries to leave, right?
Right.
So all the hairdressers give them, you know, give him their money.
That makes sense.
And then the owner of the hair salon or whatever, Olga, comes out and she's like, oh, you want my money, right? She's like about to hand over the money and she kicks him. And he falls to the ground, right?
Uh-huh.
And then I guess she beats him up and ties him up and puts him in the back room.
It's great, now she can hand this horrible guy over to the proper authorities. Why is this news?
This woman rapes him for 3 days straight.
Oh my, that's horrible. No wonder it's a story.
What? This story just took a turn I did not expect.
Best story of the week. Best story of the week.
Best story of the week.
Listen. No. Dude, she rapes him for 3 days straight, okay? What she does is, she feeds him Viagra, so he gets hard.
Oh, this woman is unbelievable.
She is, okay. And also, when she handcuffs him, she finally handcuffs him, right? Because he was tied up at first.
Give the feminine gender a little credit, at least. Women can be just as vile as any man rapist can be. You do believe in equality of the sexes, after all, don't you? Now, women may have to be a bit more clever with their methodology when committing such an act, but that doesn't mean that the possibility is negate. Why are people trying so hard to prove women can rape men? If I wanted to drag a man into my car, hold him down, and rape him, it would be literally, physically impossible. I guess these people mean situations where a woman coerces a man into doing a type of sex he didn't want to. A situation where a woman drugs a man and sexually assaults him. 'Cause let's be real, this would be the only time a woman will be able to overpower a man physically. Men could be victims of rape by other men. I like how all these posts are dismissing women on man rape because they think that not one single woman ever could overpower one single man ever. As if women are a monolith and men are a monolith. Way to disenfranchise one entire gender while simultaneously building up another based on stereotypes. Who's egregiously adhering to gender stereotypes now? By the way, not only is this extremely sexist in nature, it's also extremely false. An analysis of 302 men battered by their female partners found that 35% of men had sustained severe physical injuries as a result of battering. Now I ask, if a woman can do that to a man, who's to say that she can't rape a man? Women are weak. They struggle with opening a fucking jar. And you talking about women doing one of the most brutal crimes in the world, how vagina can rape dick. If you don't want to have sex, then his penis is not erected. So how she put his penis inside her? And we can't forget those among the human population who would blame the victims in this scenario either. No, we cannot. To say, if he didn't want it, why was his dick hard, is the exact same thing as saying, if she didn't want it, why was she wet? Either both physiological reflexes to certain stimuli mean that the stimuli is wanted in all cases, or they're merely just that, a physiological reflex to certain stimuli. But Weeb, the token feminist in my audience, says in an effort to save face for an entire movement, those are only fringe feminists. They have no real power. No one of any importance actually thinks like that, do they? We're fighting for equal rights against a patriarchal society and such. Yada yada yada. When we have articles posted to Feminist Current, Canada's leading feminist website such as this, though, I have to disagree. No, we don't need to center men in conversations about rape. Which only says that because the author is looking at a rape from the all too normal perspective of simply rapist equals man and victim equals woman, and doesn't even come close to addressing male rape in any instance, then you know, it's just fringe. There is no acknowledgement of those people who have been sexually assaulted that don't just happen to, typically fit the mold of what it means to be a victim in certain people's eyes, and that is very telling of the state of affairs of gender justice in Canada. On a related note, who needs MGTOW YouTube channels to convert men to the anti-women relations cause when we have articles like this? Have you ever beat up your boyfriend? 'Cause, we have. This is written in the most brush-off tones one could imagine for such a thing. Even while acknowledging that 70% of all partner violence is perpetrated by women among relationships with non-reciprocal interpersonal violence, you can bet your ass that had this been the reverse in terms of gender, there would have been a hoot and a riot. Granted, this was written in 2007, 10 years ago, but I digress. But we are doing an archival study of such things. After all, when citing the existence of the patriarchy and sexism, feminists like to use past examples of the fact that women couldn't vote, own property, dated references, and such. It's only fair that I do so as well when talking about how oppressed men have been in our country. Well, in the West, if we're being, truly accurate. Granted, they are not that dated, only within the past 20 years or so. Now, feminists will tell you that we live in a patriarchy, that systemically people are discriminated against via gender, race, religion, take your pick. And sometimes, they're right, but they'll never usually cite specific instances of such systemic discrimination. Well, never fear, because where they have slacked off, I have not. Granted, they may not like what I'm about to divulge, but it's the truth. In a press release special report entitled Domestic Violence Programs Discriminate Against Male Victims, it was found that the Domestic Violence Against Women's Act Implementation Committee instructed the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council as follows, quote, "The concept paper focused on serving men who were victims of domestic violence. Under the STOP formula, block grant funding must be allocated to programs that focus on violence against women. The following documentation was provided from the Violence Against Women's Office. STOP subgrantees should continue to provide services for both women and men who are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. The statutory purpose areas govern the STOP formula grant program, and the legislative history of the Violence Against Women Act, however, demonstrate that Congress was focused on violence against women and in particular on institutional discrimination against women, victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Reliable statistics, moreover, continue to demonstrate the overwhelming majority of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking crimes are committed against women. To reflect Congress's focus on violence against women and the demonstrated need in communities against the country to improve response to women victims, states must fund only programs that focus on violence against women. However, such programs must provide services to a similarly situated male victims in need." Some patriarchy we live in, right guys, where gender discrimination of domestic violence assistance against men has been going on since 2002. It has been 15 years since then, and all the patriarchy has mustered up for its kith and kin has been 2 domestic shelters in Texas. But let's look at something else that will pique your fancy. Brooklyn DA to launch program allowing female felons to serve sentences at home. Women accepted into Justice Home will receive individual and group therapy, substance abuse counseling if needed, GED prep, and job training. They will not have to wear electronic ankle bracelets. In fact, they don't actually have to stay at home. They can take the kids to school, go grocery shopping, go to church, and visit grandma. Fabi says the threat they pose to the community is low. 2/3 of women jailed in the U.S. committed nonviolent crimes, and really, violent women won't be eligible for justice home. Is this get-out-of-jail card for women fair to men convicted of equivalent crimes? Well, 58% of male convicts are fathers. Most are not the primary parent. 80% of single families are headed by women. While I'm not necessarily against progressive reformation of nonviolent felony offenders, I have to ask why on earth you felt the need to make this about solely the mothers, when we all know that usually the reason little Billy grows up to be a suicidal high school dropout runaway felon is because daddy isn't home. There are a plethora of statistics spanning prior to 2013 that support this, but I digress because
won't somebody please think of the children?
Isn't why we want only women felons to get off scot-free, is it? Otherwise, this next article would not have been written. Judges told, be more lenient to women criminals. Judges have been told to deal less severely with female criminals than men when determining how to sentence them. Female criminals are more likely to have mental health or educational difficulties and to have parenting responsibilities, while a lower proportion will have committed violent crimes than men, according to new guidelines. And there's that mother card again, see previous point I've just made, but with the added bonus that women are just educationally deficient, mentally unhealthy, and just, it's gorgeous. Thank you so much for that. You just given me a gold mine. Again, with the monoliths. Make up your mind, society. Are there differences between the genders or no differences between the genders? Do we live in a patriarchy where men get all these cool advantages like not being educationally deficient and mentally unhealthy at the same time getting harsher sentences, or are we all equal to each other? No differences of any kind, and thus should get equal sentencing. Make up your mind. Women's prisons should all close within a decade. I'm all for having that discussion of reformation of the prison system in America and other countries, but why are we limiting it to just women's justice practices? Doesn't that seem a tad, what's the word, sexist? And then if you look further into this article, you'll find this little lovely tidbit. The radical proposals are made by Labour peer Baroness Corston in a report commissioned by the Home Office. Instead of being in prison, the vast majority of 4,300 behind bars would be ordered to attend new community centers during the day. They would be given help to kick any addictions they have and to stop committing any crimes such as shoplifting before returning home at night. All the women jails would shut down within the next decade and can instead be converted into prisons for men. John Reeds is facing chronic overcrowding in men's prisons, forcing him to take the drastic step of begging the courts to jail only the worst offenders. Not even broaching the subject of reformation for the men's prison and justice systems issues. Instead, let's tackle minority of prisoners issues first, then by default it will assist the issue of overcrowding in the men's department somehow. Do you know how ass-backwards that thought process is? This isn't even recent, it's 2007. I shudder to consider the extent to which the patriarchy has been influencing the system today. But you wish to know how. How did this idea that rape and partner violence can only happen to women become so prevalent in a patriarchal society? Luckily for you, there is an entire commentary outlining how. It's entitled Processes Explaining the Concealment and Distortion of Evidence on Gender Symmetry and Partner Violence by Murray A. Strauss. First is the most important thing to behold, which is this. To take just one recent example, analysis from the study of 32 nations and the International Dating Violence Study, Strauss 2007, Strauss and International Dating Violence Research, Consortium 2004, found about equal perpetration rates and predominance of mutual violence in all 32 samples, including non-Western nations. Moreover, data from that study also show that within a couple relationship, domination and control by women occur as often as by men and are as strongly associated with perpetration of partner violence by women as by men. How, with this information, can we not take male rape and male domestic abuse seriously? Or at least as seriously as we take female rape and domestic violence. It's simple. Had I not gone looking for this information, obsessively digging up old news articles and statistics buried in the archives of the internet, you likely never would have known any of this information. They say that knowledge is power, but ignorance is truly where power lies. Just imagine the guilt and the benefits that befall a few overly repeated mistruths in today's society. Women are the victims because men are predators. Women are oppressed because men are keeping them down. Women need men to shape up, and society needs to change to fit women because they can't thrive in the current state of conditions. This sentiment does not a boss-ass woman make. This sentiment does not improve relationships between the genders. You're creating divides where there need not be any. It does the opposite of bring us together. It tells women that they are victims, and men that they are predators, and nothing more, when in fact, that is not the truth, as I have demonstrated. But you ask again, how? How can such misinformation be so perpetuated in the age of information? That can't be all there is it? We're not just being lied to over and over again. You're right. There's so much more. This letter that I found, it further outlines exactly what I'm referring to in 7 different methods. And guess what? There are examples that go with each method. I encourage you to read this letter in its entirety on your own. Links in the description to all of what I have shown you today. Method 1 is the suppression of evidence. The example that Strauss gives us in this letter is the survey done by the Kentucky Commission on the Status of Women obtained data on both men and women, but only the data on male perpetration was published. Schulman, 1979. Strauss also documented about 4 other studies engaged in the same reporting dishonesty. I say that with no amount of certainty, as when I tried to look at the sources provided, I was met with a paywall. And since I do not have all the necessary finances to access, despite my student credentials, I couldn't exactly go digging much further, but I did find them, and their abstracts. Although, if you would like to look into these, I have provided a link in the description to this letter, which possesses all the relevant citations. That being said, I am inclined to believe them. Not necessarily because of this little disclaimer that was in the letter. Among researchers not committed to that ideology, many, including me and some of my colleagues, have withheld results showing gender symmetry to avoid being victims of vitriolic denunciations and ostracism. This speaks to the author's motive, which is not to be misleading us. In fact, the author has nothing to gain in divulging such information, and to be frank, everything to lose. Most of all, their credibility as an academic and a scientist. I am much more inclined to believe the author of this article, though, because of this bit of text near the end. It was painful for me as a feminist to write this commentary. I have done so for 2 reasons. First, I am also a scientist, and for this issue, my scientific commitments overrode my feminist commitments. Perhaps even more important, I believe that the safety and well-being of women requires efforts to end violence by women, and the option to treat partner violence in some cases as a problem of psychopathology, or in the greater majority of cases as a family system problem. Method 2. Avoiding obtaining data inconsistent with the patriarchal dominance theory. Yes, patriarchal dominance theory is exactly what you think it is. The evidence given by Strauss is this. The Canadian Violence Against Women Survey, Johnson and Sacco 1995, for example, used what can be called a feminist version of the conflict tactics scale to measure partner violence. This version omitted the questions on perpetuation by the female participants in the study. And I think you'll find this next bit a little bit interesting. For the U.S. National Violence Against Women Survey, Jedin and Thonis, 2000, the U.S. Department of Justice originally planned the same strategy. Fortunately, the U.S. Center for Disease Control added a sample of men to the project. Method 3. Cite only studies that show male perpetration. U.S. Department of Justice publications almost always cite only the National Crime Victimization Study, which shows male predominance. Duroso et al., 2005. They ignore the Department of Justice publication critiques, which lead to a revision of the survey to correct that bias. Now, I went looking to double-check this, and the U.S. Department of Justice website didn't yield anything, but by gosh diddly observe the Bureau of Justice Statistics Intimate Partner Violence 1993 to 2010. Would you look at this? Under About the Source Data, it says solely National Crime Victimization Survey. This is probably mainly because they administer said survey, but will you take a look at what I found when I clicked said link? The Bureau of Justice Statistics, BJS, National Crime Victimization Survey, NCVS, is the nation's primary source of information on criminal victimization. naughty naughty. Any researcher worth their salt will tell you that primarily basing everything on a single solitary source of information is like only ever taking one person's advice on all matters throughout your life and no one else's. That's why my long-ass informational videos always have at least 10, if not more, citations. Because if you only wish to cite one source, then all I have to do is cite my own single source, and we're going in circles about this. When it comes to non-reciprocal violence between intimate partners, women are more often the perpetrators. Joanne Earhart Trickle, 2007. But if that's not enough, let me include one of my own favorite little tidbits of information I discovered on this journey. On the screen right now is the FBI's NIBRS data statistics for 2013, comparing the rate of historical rape with new rape. You might be wondering, what constitutes as new rape? Well, it's a definition change. However, before we get to that definition change, I'd like to just cite for you the Cornell Law definition. Rape. Any person subject to this chapter who commits a sexual act upon another person. The term sexual act means, according to Cornell Law, contact between the penis and the vulva or anus or mouth, and for purposes of this subparagraph, contact involving penis occurs upon penetration, however slight, or B, the penetration, however slight, of the vulva or anus or mouth of another by any part of the body or by any object with an intent to abuse, humiliate, harass, or degrade any person, or to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person. 1. Using unlawful force against that other person. 2. Using force causing or likely to cause death or grievous bodily harm to any person. 3. Threatening or placing that other person in fear that any person will be subjected to death, grievous bodily harm, or kidnapping. 4. Rendering that other person unconscious. Or 5. Administering to the other person by force or threat of force, or without the knowledge of or consent of that person, a drug, intoxicant, or other similar substances, and thereby subsequently impairing the ability of that other person to appraise or control conduct, is guilty of rape and shall be punished as a court-martial may direct. That is so very long, all-encompassing, and inclusive. However, the NIBRS study, short for the National Incident-Based Reporting System, is used by law enforcement agencies in the US for collecting and reporting crime data. Sounds hunky-dory, right? Wrong. Today I'm going to show you a magic trick. How you can make an entire demographic of victims disappear. Because if you look at the definition of rape the FBI uses to collect data, we'll find something very interesting. Penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. So you ask, what's the problem, weeb? That's a lot less broad a definition than the Cornell one, you'll notice, and you'll also notice it's missing a very crucial clarifier. It takes into account forcible penetration. That's all fine and dandy, but what about being forcibly made to penetrate? No dice. I mean, I suppose beggars can't be choosers. Up until 2013, the previous definition was carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will. So, for a good 80 years, men weren't even included in this study at all. Now it's just men-on-men interactions, what have yous. Which is why, if you look back at this graph, one half of it is virtually barren.
This is what men's rights look like!
Method 4. Conclude that results support feminist beliefs when they do not. And the example used here is a study by Kern-Smith 2005, for example, states that males and females were found to differ in their motivations for using violence in relationships, and that female violence may be more related to maintaining personal liberty in a relationship than gaining power. However, although Kern-Smith's Table 2 shows that women had higher scores on the striking back factor, only one question in this factor is about self-defense. The other questions in the factor are about being angry and coercing the partner. So, despite naming the factor as striking bad, it is mostly about anger and coercion. Therefore, the only significantly different factor shows that women, more than men, are motivated by anger at the partner and by efforts to coerce that partner. Which, if it weren't obvious, is a direct contradiction of the initial stated conclusion. This is what happens when a researcher has an agenda. Things become muddled and interpretations go awry. On to the next one then. Method 5. Create evidence by citation. Or a woozle effect occurs when frequent citation of previous publications that lack evidence mislead us into thinking there is evidence. For example, subsequent to the World Health Organization study and the Kern-Smith study, papers discussing gender differences in motivation will cite them to show that female violence is predominantly in self-defense, which is the opposite of what the research actually shows. Wow. Who could have predicted that a consistently repeated lie would start to become the truth? Method 6. Abstract publication of articles and abstract funding research that might contradict the idea that male dominance is the cause of PV. Possibly the most malicious of all these methods to perpetuate mistruths. I can understand ignorance. I can even understand lying to yourself with the facts present. I understand that such is the nature of cognitive dissonance, that it can be a bitch to rationalize, but this speaks to a level of awareness where the inhibitor is aware of the possibility and attempting to silence said possibility. An example of denying funding to research that might contradict the idea that PV is a male-only crime is the call for proposals to investigate partner violence issued on December 2005 by the National Institute for Justice. The announcement stated that proposals to investigate male victimization would not be eligible. Method 7 is harass, threaten, and penalize researchers who produce evidence that contradicts feminist beliefs. I may have lied, this one's the most malicious of them all, and I will be reading all of it as it is important. Susan Steinmetz made the mistake of publishing a book and articles, which clearly showed about equal rates of perpetration by males and females. Anger over this resulted in a bomb threat at her daughter's wedding. She was the object of a letter-writing campaign to deny her promotion and tenure at the University of Delaware. 20 years later, the same process resulted in a lecturer at the University of Manitoba whose dissertation found gender symmetry and partner violence being denied promotion and tenure. My own experiences have included having one of my graduate students being warned at a conference that she will never get a job if she does her PhD research with me. At the University of Massachusetts, I was prevented from speaking by shouts and stomping. The chairperson of the Canadian Commission on Violence Against Women stated at 2 hearings held by commission that nothing that Strauss publishes can be believed because he is a wife-beater and sexually exploits students, according to a Toronto Magazine article. When I was elected president of the Society for the Study of Social Problems and rose to give the president address, a group of members occupying the first few rows of the room stood up and walked out. Does any of this sound familiar to you?
Stop Warren Farrell! Stop Warren Farrell!
And like these so-called men's rights groups are actually hate groups.
Antifa, feminist protests, roaming millennials, college talk at Lafayette University, BLM, any of it? I have cited multiple statistics and a recent story that exemplifies that women are just as capable of violence and, in fact, as likely to commit violence in a partner setting as a man is. I have shown you just how the system works against these truths to hide them, to bury them. I have shown you several examples of articles that announce initiatives or call for the dismantling of women's prison systems. I have exhibited a story, one of many, mind you, where a woman can commit a violent, intimate, and invasive act and receive little to no punishment. You want to tell me that we live in a patriarchy where women are systematically oppressed by their masculine counterparts? I think not.